It's a great pleasure to be with you here today and to welcome my friend Kem Gardner to be the speaker at our Dean's Convocation. You know, one of the things you're going to learn as you go through life is that the thing that really matters is the kind of relationships that you develop and build over time. I've had the privilege of being associated with Kem Gardner since 1971 when he was serving as Chief of Staff of United States Senator Frank Moss, who was the last Democrat to be elected to the United States Senate from Utah, in Washington. And he came here to the campus of Utah State University to recruit a summer intern to go to work in Washington. It was my great pleasure to be selected by Kem. You know, Kem is just...
How about your middle name?
Yeah, well, it did have something to do with it. I think the fact that my middle name is Delano, maybe it was a signal to him that he was safe in recruiting me. Kem is just 7 years older than I am. He looks a lot younger than that, but he's only 7 years older than I am. So when I was 21, he was 28, and at 28 he was Chief of Staff for Senator Moss. And it was already very clear to everybody who knew him, everybody who watched him, that Kem was destined for greatness. You know, in that office we had some very, very talented people, one of whom was Chris Matthews. Some of you may know Chris Matthews from Hardball. He was a legislative assistant in that office. And I remember sitting around one day with Chris Matthews and a couple of the other legislative assistants, and we were watching Kem work the phones on behalf of some legislative initiative. And one of them turned to me and said, you know, if you could bottle Kem Gardner, you could make $1 million. Well, that was when $1 million was really worth something. So let me tell you something, you can make a lot more than that if you could bottle Kem Gardner. I've had the privilege of knowing many of the finest leaders of my generation, and I can tell you there's none that casts a longer or larger shadow than Kem does. You know, he's in your little brochure, as you read about Kem's background, you see that he really is a community builder. And that word, I think, is a powerful word, and it's a very apt phrase when applied to Kem. Of course, he's been a community builder in his profession as a real estate developer. He's done some of the finest buildings in Utah, the Huntsman corporate offices in Salt Lake City, One Utah Center, the Gallatin Plaza, the Gateway, many of the IHC buildings, many of the university buildings, many of the state buildings. These are beautiful, enduring legacies of Kem. And oftentimes, he'll choose a project to do where it's not just a new and beautiful space that's being created, but it's a space that's being created out of something that was blighted, as for example where the Gateway has been erected, where we had abandoned rail lines before. But Kem is a community builder in so many other ways as well. In the arts, he's been involved with the symphony over many, many years. In education, he's built communities in education. He served as the chairman of the State Board of Regents. In philanthropy, leading the United Way, in serving on the board of the Intermountain Healthcare in service to Rotary and to various other boards of directors in the church, where he's been a bishop, a stake president, and a mission president. I had the privilege of working with him as his counselor in the mission presidency in Boston and in sports. He was the head of the ambassadors for the Olympics. And in fact, it was in Boston that he really got to know Mitt Romney, who he recruited. He was the principal person responsible for recruiting Mitt Romney to come and lead the Olympics. And you know what a great success that has been, and what a great success Mitt has gone on to have. I will just not take a lot more time. I could, but I won't, because I want to hear Kem recite some cowboy poetry, or maybe Emily Dickinson. He can do any of those things very, very well. He has a razor-sharp mind. He's a world-class negotiator. He has a charismatic personality. All of those things are readily apparent as you get to know him. But maybe you won't know because those strengths come across so powerfully when you meet Kem Gardner. You won't know maybe the very first time you meet him of his tender and caring heart. He's at his very best when he leads from his heart. I've stood by his side and shared his grief as his son lay close to death, and he stood by my side and shared my grief when I lost a loved one. I'm proud to call him my friend, Kem Gardner.
I got to have that mic. That was nice of you. Do you get the impression the dean's going to hit me up for money? You know, John Kennedy used to say after those flowery introductions, well, I'm not as good as all that, but I'm a lot better than what you're thinking. I used to think when I was young that if I was ever rich and powerful, I'd be happy. Man, was I right. Sorry about that. I did go down to Cedar City last weekend to their sheep days, and they had me do some cowboy poetry. That's what Doug's referring to. I hadn't thought about doing this, but I'll give you a short one. So, I don't know how to do this. It's an IQ test. The banker took his ledger out. The rancher took a seat. Let's see. I lent you 20 thou for cattle, corn, and wheat. Let's talk about the cattle first. The rancher's face looked pained. You know how bad the market's been. Lost 15, he explained. 15 what? 15 cents a pound? 15 died of thirst? Nope. $15,000 lost. But hey, it could be worse. The banker gulped and then said, well, what about the grain? Oh, the hoppers ate up all my wheat. The sweet corn needed rain. My pig got sick. My son got drunk and joined the Moonies church. I figure I'm down 40 thou. But hey, it could be worse. What do you mean it could be worse? That ain't even funny. The rancher shrugged and then replied, could have been my money. I just threw that one out. You know, it was fun. So many years ago when I was slim and handsome and before I got, fat and rich and to come up to Utah State. I used to pray, by the way, Doug, that all my friends, or that I'd be thin. Now I pray my friends will be fat. You know that one. And it's working on a lot of them. When I first met, excited because of his enthusiasm and how bright he was a star academically. And then to think that he took care of me and got us started back there. Here's my son Christian about this. And I brought my other son Andrew with me. I want you to meet two of my sons.
We'll give you the real story after.
Why did you come? The thing about Doug is while he was teaching at Harvard, he was consulting to all of the nation's top companies. And I wondered how long he could continue to teach at Harvard and carry on the pace of all of the consulting that he was doing, because he was so close to all of the top business leaders in America, like Lee Iacocca, among others. And eventually he started doing it full time, but he never could get academia out of his blood. I mean, he lives to associate with students and teaching and being involved. And this is a perfect marriage. Can you imagine having a dean that knows every business leader in America and can tap guys like me to come up? You know, I'm not a business leader. I'm just a friend that lives in the neighborhood. But I really love and appreciate Doug, and you'll come to see what a remarkable person he is. I was just born up the road, if you went up the canyon to Star Valley, one of 9 children of a school teacher father. I knew nothing about ever preparing myself for business. Gardners didn't go into business. They went into education. They were all school teachers. And we moved down to Utah, and I attended a year at Weber State after Davis High School. And then I did a mission to West Germany, and you did yours to North Germany. And then I went down to the U and stayed there on through law school. And I was an editor of the Law Review and decided to go with a big law firm down in Newport Beach, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, the old GD&C. And I was really proud of myself to get that offer to go with a big law firm. And my wife was from Washington, D.C., and she had no ties really to Utah. And she was excited about going to California. But when I was in law school, I had made an interesting decision, which didn't seem like it was very much or profound. It'll happen to a lot of you. You'll do things that later have consequences, and you never can understand why. But I was driving down First South, and I saw a sign for Hubert Humphrey for president. Now, this would have had to be in, what, 67? And I thought, oh, man, I love Hubert Humphrey. I'll stop and see if there's any literature. And I walked in, and there was a law student I knew who was a junior. I was just a lowly freshman or sophomore law student. And I asked for some information. He said, do you want to help on the Humphrey campaign? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you can help us. The conventions are coming up, and it looks like we'll be going against McCarthy and Gene and Robert Kennedy. And you could help us work on delegates and so forth. And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Now, that was a big decision to get involved in politics, to actually go out and do something, because by summertime, the attorney, Phil Calley, that was running the Moss campaign and the Humphrey campaign, and Jim Faust, who now we have to call president, but who was another attorney working on the Moss campaign and Humphrey, they asked me if I would just work all summer for Humphrey going to the conventions. And I started going to all the county conventions, giving the Humphrey talk and working the delegates and as a law student. And when I got out of law school and decided to go with Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, I got a call from Jim Faust who said, Kim, why don't you think about going back to Washington as Senator Moss's AA? Wayne Owens is going to run for Congress. That slot's available. And that would be a good experience for you to have in Washington for a couple of years. And I talked to the people at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, because I was thinking, oh, I don't want to interrupt my career. I got to get down and really get into law. And they said, oh, that would be great. Moss is in the leadership of the Senate. He's number 3, and he chairs all these important committees. If you could go back there and get contacts in the Senate, that would be great for the firm. And so I thought, well, let's do it. My wife wanted to go back to Washington, D.C., and that's why I had a chance to meet Doug. But I had an opportunity to go to Washington and do things that I never dreamed I could have done. There is nothing in your life that will prepare you for some of the experiences you can have in politics. We were over aeronautical and space science on the Senate side, and Jim Fletcher, who'd been my president at the University of Utah, was over NASA. So guess who went to all the NASA launches on the NASA planes and so forth? And when Gene Westwood was put in as chair of the National Committee, guess who went down to Watergate and helped her get set up? And who did the president then pick when he had to pick some young Democrats to go to the Soviet Union when détente was starting? I got to go as one of the few young Democrats on that trip when they picked 12 young political leaders and have all that experience. I mean, you just have enormous opportunities. So then the question was, well, what do I do? Because law firms in Washington wanted me to come for lobbying because of NASA and the Space Committee. Gibson Dunn wanted me to come back now to start my career. And so it's now 1973, getting to be about December, and I've just returned from a month in the Soviet Union. And I talked to a fellow named Roger Boyer that I'd known when I was in law school. And we'd been put in one of those student wards together. And Roger said, I'm going to start a business out in Salt Lake. I've got it started, the Boyer Company. And he said, I'm going to do real estate, but not brokerage and not selling lots. He said, what I'm going to do is develop a long-term equity portfolio, a long-term equity real estate portfolio. And I couldn't say it. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we're going to use leverage. We'll borrow money off the strength of the tenants that we find, and we'll have their rents pay the mortgages, and we'll get appreciation and depreciation, and we'll develop a portfolio. And I said, well, how will we live while we're doing this? Because I didn't know anything about business. I'm not as smart as you. I took liberal arts and law school, and I hadn't thought about business. And he said to me these questions. I'm going to read them to you because I've always remembered them. Do you want to make deals, or do you want to document them? The excitement's in making the deals, he said, not in writing it up as the attorney. Attorneys you pay by the hour. That's interesting. Do you want to work for yourself or for a law factory? Do you want to create value for yourself or someone else? No, he didn't just say that, but in the course of our conversations, these were the ideas that he was saying. He said, what will best get you out of bed and provide you with the excitement of wanting to get out and go to work and keep working, even though you get old? Well, you know, he was trying to tell me that there's a lot that business has going for it. And wouldn't I be, he said, when I graduated from the Harvard Business School, I had an opportunity to go with a lot of companies. But he said, I decided I would rather put together my own company because I want to work for myself and I want what I make to be mine. Okay, that's all well and good, Roger. But how do we live while we're doing this long-term equity portfolio? And he says, well, I've been able to borrow $100,000 to get us started. But he said, you know everybody. Because of your politics, you know every business leader in the state. You know everybody. You can really work it and get us opportunities. And I said, well, let me talk to Governor Rampton about this. And I talked to the governor, and he said, I don't want you to go to California. I'd love to see you. You need to stay here in the state. And he said, go talk to Dale Williams over Administrative Services, and let's see if there aren't some state buildings to get you started. Now, how's that for contacts? Don't miss an opportunity, if you have one, to get involved politically and to start making some contacts that will benefit you. The second part of that is, don't miss out on an opportunity to have a mentor like I had Roger Boyer, somebody that's smarter than you are and has more vision and can help you see a bigger picture. I was off the farm, and I'd had some experience in school and in Washington, but I didn't see things the way Roger saw things. So we started the Boyer Company, and I said, don't call it Boyer Gardner, a decision I've always regretted. I'm going to run for office. I'm going to run for governor. Some of you would never remember. I ran in '84 trying. How many of you think the state likes a tax increase for education? I think I did. But here we model that we evolved. I just want to go through it with you real fast. Lease to credit tenants. Find a tenant. Is there a better, for example? Borrow on the strength. In other words, was the bank loaning me the money? Yeah, they were loaning money. What to do? Am I just coming out behind this, or I think like that? But anyway.
Don't breathe.
Don't breathe? Okay. Now you know. And those guys that are tipping over in those seats. But think about it. If you have a tenant, they've got a good financial statement. Loaning you the money to build the building is loaning it to you on the strength of that, not necessarily the dumb developer that's putting it together that has no money. Now, you may need to have some equity in the deal. And so what we did on the first building, we didn't have the equity to really go in, so we sold the building up front. We actually made $350,000 before we started the building by finding investors to take that first building as we got it started. But, and then we had some equity. But what was the advantage of a long-term equity portfolio? It was, we really have not had the game plan to build to sell. We had the game plan build to own. We want to own it for the long term and manage it. So do you build better if you're building for the long term and you're going to own it? Yeah. You do a better job because you're going to own it. It's not a hit and run deal where you just build it and you're flipping it. And so we wanted to own these buildings, and we wanted to do them right, and we wanted to manage them and build the portfolio. Now, we knew we had to manage risk because we were entrepreneurs. Real estate is a risky business, and you've got to manage risk. So the first thing is we decided that we would always try to get a 10 to a 12% return on costs. Now, we didn't put developers' fees in or anything like that, but if this is the cost of the building, the hard costs, and the soft costs are financing and architects and engineers and the closing costs and so forth, but the total cost, not counting any developer costs, if we got a 10 to a 12% return on those costs as the lease rate, and then we could get a loan for 6, 7, 8% or so, then but you've got to remember that you've got to amortize that, so the cap rate on that gets up closer to the 10, but you still can cover it, you can finance it, and you've got a little spread to live on while you're doing this. Now, we knew that we couldn't afford speculation because if we spec'd a building and couldn't lease it, we were done for. So we always went out as a rule and tried to get at least 50% of the building pre-leased. And then we were willing to take the risk. I don't know, Doug, that I'm just let it go. Well, I think I'm moving around. Maybe I need to stay still. But so we decided we will not spec buildings. We will pre-lease. Then, the one thing we learned is we got to have a little cash on hand because on our financial statements, if you show no cash, it's pretty hard to get lenders to loan you money. You got to have a little cash because you got to also be able to weather some downturns or some storms. So cash is king. Husband your cash. Now, what that really meant is that we couldn't take big salaries, and we couldn't spend a lot of money on ourselves, and we couldn't drive Mercedes, and we couldn't, we needed our money for both equity and for reserves. So people would say, well, why do you go into real estate? Because the returns are low and it's slow. But in Utah, there have never been really any big ups and any really big downs. It's been pretty constant growth. And that formula has worked pretty well for us, and we've been able to develop the portfolio. We are developers. Christian is a developer. Andrew is a developer. We're not flippers. We're not investors. We try to bring value to a piece of property. We don't buy a piece of property to watch it go up in value and try to sell it to somebody. We buy a piece of property because we think we can do something that'll make a difference in the community. We think we can take an old Woolworths and Penny's on Main Street and 2nd South in Salt Lake and tear it down and build a One Utah Center. We can take an old rail yard and build a gateway. Christian has just tied up 215 acres in the center of the Salt Lake Valley at between 7200 South and 7800 South, where the old slag heaps were. And the EPA has remediated that, and now you've got just an empty piece of property, and we can be creative. We can do something that creates value out there. We can do a mixed-use project. We can do housing and flex space and office space and retail. I mean, we can really bring value to that old slag heap. Can't we? Yeah, good answer. Well, that's very important to me because I've never wanted to be known as a flipper or an investor like that. I've always wanted to be known what Doug said, and I really appreciate that he would say that, as a community builder, as somebody that brings value to a community. And so the next item was be patient. Be prepared to wait on your returns, protect your cash. But one thing we did that I thought was very important is we got bright people like you, but we took some bright people and we said, do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to be a real estate developer? We can't pay you big salaries because we're protecting our cash. We can give you a modest salary, but we will give you an interest in the project that you do. You work a project and get us a project. We'll bank it. We'll finance it. We'll help you. And we will share. You'll be a limited partner, so to speak. You'll have no risk. You're not on the mortgage. You're not going to lose your house or anything. But we will share the equity on that project. So we'll put together a separate partnership for every project, or an L.C., because L.C., you're taxed as a corporation, but you got partnership benefits. And or you're taxed as a partnership. I said it backwards. And yet you got the protection of a corporation, the legal protection. But so we form an L.C., and they would be in the L.C., but they would not be on the mortgage. And we would give up to 25% of a project to the guys that helped do the deal and brought it. I mean, we created a lot of millionaires and entrepreneurs by being willing to share in the equity. Now, there's a lot of developers that just pay salaries, and I've never felt that they have gotten the motivation out of their people of those that are willing to share in the rewards. And then finally, one of our business model plans was to give back to the community, both in terms of time as well as in terms of money. Really, right now, my kids all have their interest in the family partnership. And why am I continuing to work? It's because I want to be able to give back, to still give some money. And I've given a lot away, but I want to give a lot more away. I really do. You're not giving it away. You're really helping with this idea of improving the community. And there's no, my two issues, and there probably are others, I'm very involved in health care, and the family just gave $3 million to the new hospital. But we give scholarship money because we believe strongly in education, and we give money to United Way because a community is judged by how they take care of the less fortunate. And I can't think of anything more important than to take care of the many needs in a community. So if you had my list of what I think our business model was a long-term equity portfolio, using leverage, building to own, managing our risk, being someone that brings improvement to the ground as a community builder, and being patient, and then giving back to the community in service as well as with your resources. Now it's been, to me, you guys are young, and I know you think that guy's a windbag up there, but you don't know what it means to look back now almost 35 years. I mean, what's 33 years? And when Roger said to me, I want to develop a long-term equity portfolio, he said these words. Now listen to this and see how astounding this sentence is. What if we borrowed $1 billion? Now, he said this in '73. What if we borrowed $1 billion and paid it back with tenant rents? Think what we 30 years. Where do you get that kind of? Do you think that way? I can tell you I wasn't thinking that way. But the truth of the matter is, as I look back, we've borrowed over $1 billion. Didn't quite ever end up with it all because mortgage down a ways and then say, oh, there's some cash we need for the next deal, let's refinance. Or you would sell a building, the equity. When we did Gateway, we had to come up with $90 million. Well, we sold buildings, we borrowed against buildings, we to get that money. And I'm being patient as we earn it back. Not only see it back, but with good returns. But what I now can show you over 100 of those individual partnerships or LCs that were put together. Like Gateway would be one. And it's got $2 million. And it's really, if you're patient, the cookie cutter, the thing you know how to do, everything that I did money on. Well, I'm not Larry Miller, by the way. I mean, Larry, anything, you know. I mean, but me, I mean, if I got outside, it was tougher. I mean, I did better doing what I knew how to do and being clicker here. It was the Boyer Company. We've developed office, residential, and medical. These are just a few office buildings over the regional government center there, or the Novell building down there, or we own this building and lease it up by the university. Genetics buildings, the one Utah Center that we're proud of, because Roger was on a mission in Toronto, and I negotiated this building with Utah Power and Light and a law firm and put that together. And when he got home, he couldn't believe it. But, that's really one that I've been proud of, because that kind of made a statement. People that saw that building said, hey, these guys really did something. Because it was a pretty blighted piece of ground. Every mayor campaign for years stood on that corner to say how the city was falling apart. Now they stand on Main Street and First South. Here's the Huntsman building. Here's one of our Gateway buildings. We're now on our 5th office building at Gateway. We continued to build office space there. Here's ARUP, office lab. I showed you that one. Why am I going over these again? But just an idea of some of them. Here's one we did in Idaho Falls. Here we built this just for the Huntsman Cancer Institute and donated our services to try to give back. And these are some medical office buildings, just a few of them in different places that we've got. One of the things we've done on medical is to get some liquidity for Gateway. This was a nice idea. I didn't have it, but one of our people did, is let's sell our medical buildings into a REIT. Do you know what a REIT is? Have you studied those yet? Real Estate Investment Trust. There's a lot of REITs out there for office, medical, so forth. But Healthcare Properties is the largest medical REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust. And you can sell the buildings into the REIT and not take a tax consequence until you convert the units into shares and sell them. And yet you've got the ability that you don't have to sell the whole building. You've got a lot of shares. You know, you can sell off a few shares or you can give a few as a donation. But we did put about $100 million in medical buildings, well, it's more than that, into a REIT. And then we could borrow against it or sell shares, or we haven't sold any, but or we could, I've given a lot away. I mean, that's a good way to use appreciated shares to make donations, which is what Doug probably knew about when he invited me up here. This is some retail, like Redstone, and you can start to see the outlines of Gateway, and I think that's out. It's not Christian out at Draper. Yeah, the Draper Peaks. Just some of the retail. We've got things like the Brickyard and Sugar House Commons and Gateway and projects in Riverdale and out in South Jordan. One of the really fun projects that Christian worked on before he went back to MIT to get his master's was we bought 130 acres between 114 South and 118 South, right across from the new Daybreak. We took a shot that Daybreak that Kennecott's doing was going to be a significant project, so we bought 130 acres right across from it. And we've got a Target and a J.C. Penney's and a Larry Miller 24-screen theater and a Harmon's. And now we're doing kind of a Gateway center section with a lot of mid-blocks. But this is kind of the, here's all of the Gateway type things, the center thing. Here's the theaters, Penney's, Target. Anyway, that's coming along if you get out that way. Are any of you from out in South Jordan? Well, it'll change by the time you get home. Now, why would we do some subdivisions? How did that fit into our plan? Well, the reason we did a few subdivisions, we've done several thousand lots, but not as our primary business, but theoretically we had some depreciation and we could shelter some ordinary income. So why not sell off a few lots and help shelter it and have some equity to help you in your projects? Industrial, we've got a couple of big projects. The BDO in Ogden is the big, and I'll get to it in a minute. Is this thing, am I way over time? No. Took the old Union Pacific building. Now, Union Pacific's smart. Fix that building up, and it wasn't earthquake sound or whatever. The state and take a big write-off. I'm dumb enough to take it. And they say, now what do we do with it? We don't have the money to fix it up. And so the next dumb ones in the chain gave it to me and Roger and said, all right, if you'll fix it up, you can have it. So we put $12 million up, and it's really pretty nice. It helps make the statement on Gateway. 2.1 million feet, largest redevelopment project in Utah's history, a good residential and commercial activities. You've seen it. We're adding to it right now more office space, and we're going to add a hotel that we're just finalizing and a 6th office building. It was a fairly significant statement. Gateway to move down, off Main Street to move down to Gateway. On the way up here, Andrew was listening to me as the Salt Lake Tribune called me and said, well, what do you think about the church's new project downtown? Do you think that'll compete with Gateway? And I said, well, when they made their announcement, Taubman said tenants are going to have to decide if they want to be next to Nordstrom on our project or at Gateway, meaning we're going after Gateway. And so they're the ones that are saying there's going to be competition. And we've got 30 tenants down there that they have in their Cherry Hills project that they talk so much about that they want. And we've probably got 60 that they want. But there's no question they're going to come after us. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years whether we can work together and collaborate or whether it's going to be all-out war. You hate to compete against your own church, and you hate to compete against a project where your own church is putting $1 billion in or so. So it makes it tough. But we're tough guys. Lesser people couldn't handle it. This is just some of the pictures of Gateway. I don't mean to bore you with this. We started in '79, finished it in 2001. Every month we've had increases in terms of the sales. It's really working well. And isn't it working well? Let's go to, I don't want to get into market strategy. I was trying to get to, there was California Pizza Kitchen. Net made me do that Olympic fountain. I wanted to get down to, I don't want to do that. Military housing. We're competing now against Utah State. Oh, I wasn't going to get into that.
Well, if you can compete against the church, I guess you can.
Yeah. We're doing, we've got a 50-year land lease to do all the housing up at Hillfield. And so we're going to end with 1,000 housing units up there, for the military. And that's a pretty big project. I think that, and then this is the business depot in Ogden. 1,000-acre park. We've got 6,500,000 feet of existing space. This year we'll do over $4 million in cash flow. Half of that will go to Ogden City, our partners, and the other half, I'm sure, will come up here to Utah State in some business building. Now, okay, now you're, yeah. All those that believe that can step forward. Come on. Come on. Hey, let's just talk about my problem real fast, then I'll take some questions. Okay, so you've been at this thing a long time, and two families are running a business. You never did get to be governor or anything important. And so you and Roger are both there at the business. And Roger's got 7 kids and you've got 6, and you're trying to decide, well, what do we do with this business with our children? And Christian says, I'm not going to work for a company that doesn't have Gardner in it. Now, weren't you kind of negative on just staying and working at the Boyer Company? Christian, admit it.
Yes. Damn them.
Yeah. And Roger said, well, I said, well, why doesn't Christian run it from our side? He's the oldest. And your oldest son, Jake, can run it from your side. But that wasn't very smart because I've got a daughter that's older than Christian and she thinks she should run everything. And, you know, who says she shouldn't? And Roger has sons and son-in-laws and so forth. We could not decide what to do. So what we decided was that we would stay as partners on all the things that we were doing at Gateway, BDO, other places where we were doing stuff together. We'll continue to do that together. And so I spend a lot of time going to meetings with Boyer on our existing projects. But on new projects that are outside that scope, they will do the projects with their family, their new projects, and we'll do the new projects with ours. So Christian and Andrew formed a new company called the Gardner Company. And notice what Christian did. He let Boyer know who developed One Utah. And, you know, he kind of threw some of our buildings in. And the first thing Christian did was put together a web page. You really ought to look at the web page because I think he did a fun thing with it. But it's gardnercompany.net. It's not .com, it's .net. Some other Gardner company had .com, so we had to go for .net. And then he put together this great brochure. And this brochure, look, I mean, we put One Utah on it, but I'll bet it's got Gateway in it. Now, and then it's got pictures of the projects. And then in the back, it's got the list of, didn't it have lists of all of the projects we've done?
So, yeah, Megan Martin doesn't.
Well, this one has some. Anyway, this stuff works. I was surprised because people, once he got this up, people started calling us saying, would you do this deal? Are you interested in this? Because they thought we were big shots. We had a big company. We had our website and we had a brochure and we had a lot of money. And so like Christian got back from Boise last night looking at, 60 acres in one of the best commercial pieces up there that you got tied up.
Right.
And what did they tell you? Why they went with you over all the others that were competing for it?
That we were legitimate and we knew what we were doing.
And how did they know that?
Our website.
No?
And they know who
Because you went up there.
Well, they know who you are too.
How would they? I don't know anybody in Boise. Oh, that's right. How could I forget? No, I'm not like that. I'm very humble. But 2 minutes. Yeah, I've got to take questions. But the point is that these people looked at our website. Now, don't most tenants do that? They're going to look and see what you've done, what your history is. And I have a brother that wants to do a hotel in Mexico, and he didn't have any credibility, and he says, can I use your financial statement and your website and tell them that you're involved with me? And I said, does that mean I have to guarantee the loan? I mean, you don't want to do that. Okay. My point is, I know it sounds too good to be true. I can't believe it myself, that idea that Roger had of developing a long-term equity portfolio. I forgot to tell you one sentence that he said. He said, Kem, real estate development is a blue ocean. There's
did not. He did not
He
say
said,
that.
there's not a lot of competition
Yeah.
in it. It's not a red ocean. It's a blue ocean.
Kem Gardner.